Calvin thought he was just tearing down his old pool, but by sunset he was standing against police, an angry HOA board member, and a crowd of neighbors deciding whose side they were really on. You ever think a simple Saturday chore could blow up into something way bigger than you ever imagined? That's how it felt for Calvin Brewster, a 44-year-old father of two living in Round Rock, Texas. He wasn't trying to start trouble. He wasn't looking for drama. He just wanted his backyard back. For years, an above-ground pool had taken up most of the space. At first, it was fun. His kids had splashed in it every summer, neighborhood friends had come over, and even the family dog used to circle it excitedly whenever water filled the liner. But like so many things, it got old. The liner kept tearing. The filter gave out. And every spring, it felt more like a burden than a joy. So, on this particular Saturday morning, Calvin decided he was done. He rolled up his sleeves, grabbed his toolbox, and went outside with his teenage son, Marcus Jaden Brewster, nicknamed MJ. The air was already warming up, the kind of Texas heat that promised to hit 90 degrees by lunchtime. Calvin didn't mind. He actually welcomed the sweat. To him, this was progress. "Dad, you sure we got to do all this by hand?" MJ asked, gripping the rusty ladder that used to lead into the pool. Calvin chuckled. "Son, if we wait around for someone else to do it, that pool's going to be here when you're 30. Besides, nothing wrong with putting in a little sweat equity." He started loosening bolts with an old wrench, the metal squeaking under pressure. Pieces of siding clattered to the ground. MJ worked alongside him, hauling panels across the yard. It felt like a father-son project, a chance to talk, to bond. Sharon, Calvin's wife, popped her head out the back door holding 2 cups of lemonade. "You boys better pace yourselves," she called. "It's not even noon." Calvin wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. "We're good. Just reclaiming our yard." At that moment, he felt proud. Proud that he was taking initiative, proud his son was beside him, proud his family would finally have space to barbecue and maybe even set up a small garden. But pride has a funny way of drawing attention, especially when you live in a neighborhood governed by an HOA. 2 houses down, through the open blinds of a living room window, a set of sharp eyes had already locked on him. Those eyes belonged to Patricia Norwood, a woman with a reputation that stretched across the subdivision. Mid-50s, always in pressed khakis and a polo shirt, clipboard in hand as if it were an extension of her arm. Patricia was the type who counted the number of cars parked on the street and wrote down license plates. She was the type who left warning notes for neighbors who forgot to bring in trash bins before sunset. And to her, nothing escaped notice. Calvin didn't see her at first. He was too busy pulling apart the pool walls, sweat dripping, arms straining. MJ laughed when one of the bolts gave way suddenly and sent his dad stumbling back. It was a moment of normal family life. Messy, tiring, but satisfying. But Patricia had already stepped out her door, crossing the lawn with determined strides. The sound of her shoes crunching against gravel caught Sharon's attention from the kitchen window. Sharon muttered under her breath, "Oh no." Not today, Patricia's voice carried across the yard before she even reached the fence. "Mr. Brewster, you do realize you're in violation of HOA rules, don't you?" Calvin froze mid-swing, wrench in hand. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he spotted her clipboard. MJ looked between his dad and the neighbor, sensing the tension before a word more was spoken. "Violation?" Calvin asked, his tone steady but firm. "This pool's mine. Bought it, set it up, maintained it. Now I'm tearing it down. What's the problem?" Patricia tapped her pen against the clipboard like a gavel. "Any structural modification to your property requires approval from the HOA board. That includes removal of recreational installations. You should know this." Calvin let out a short laugh, half disbelieving. "You're telling me I need permission to take down something I paid for and put up with my own hands? On my own yard?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Patricia replied, lips pursed tight. Sharon stepped outside now, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Patricia, really? He's just cleaning up. It's not hurting anyone." But Patricia's expression didn't budge. To her, rules weren't suggestions. They were weapons. Calvin looked back at his son, then at Sharon, then finally at Patricia. His jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm finishing this today. If you've got a problem with it, take it up with someone else." Patricia scribbled something furiously onto her clipboard. Her eyes never left him. And that's when Calvin realized this wasn't over. But Patricia wasn't just going to walk away quietly. She had other plans in mind. Patricia didn't leave. She stood there like a stone planted in the grass, clipboard hugged against her chest, pen tapping like a metronome of disapproval. Calvin tried to turn his back, thinking if he ignored her long enough she'd finally move on. But ignoring Patricia Norwood was like ignoring a wasp hovering over your shoulder. You could try, but eventually it was going to sting. "Mr. Brewster," she called again, her voice sharp and precise. "Continuing to dismantle that pool without approval constitutes a direct breach of Article 12 in our bylaws. I will have no choice but to report you." Calvin exhaled through his nose. "Report me for what? Taking apart a pool in my own yard? You're destabilizing the appearance of the neighborhood," Patricia said firmly. "This is exactly why we have standards. One person bends the rules, the whole community suffers." Sharon crossed her arms, standing just behind her husband. "Patricia, come on. He's cleaning up. You'd rather it sit here, half-rusted, looking worse every summer." Patricia's gaze flicked toward Sharon, then back to Calvin, as if Sharon's opinion held little weight. "This is not about preference. It's about procedure. We all signed the same agreement when we moved in." Calvin finally set the wrench down with a loud clank against the patio. He wiped sweat from his brow and looked Patricia square in the face. His patience was thinning, but his voice stayed level. "Let me ask you something. Did the HOA pay for this pool? Did the HOA replace the liner 3 times? Did the HOA clean out the leaves and frogs every spring? Number. I did. So why should they get a say in me taking it down?" Patricia pressed her lips tighter, scribbling another note. MJ shifted uncomfortably, whispering under his breath, "Dad, maybe we should just stop for today." Calvin shook his head. "No, son. Sometimes you gotta stand firm." Patricia lifted her chin. "If you don't halt this work right now, I will escalate this matter." Calvin frowned. "Escalate how? You gonna call the HOA president on a Saturday morning?" "Good luck with that." Patricia's eyes glinted. "No, Mr. Brewster. I'll call the police." That landed like a slap. Sharon blinked, stepping forward. "The police? For what? He's not breaking a law. He's not bothering anyone." "Disturbing the peace," Patricia shot back quickly, almost too quickly, like she'd rehearsed it. "And violating community ordinances." Both are legitimate concerns. Calvin couldn't help but laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Disturbing the peace? Really? The loudest thing out here is me turning a wrench. Noise is subjective," Patricia replied coldly. "And so is behavior. What may seem normal to you might be disruptive to others." That was the moment Calvin realized Patricia wasn't bluffing. She clutched her phone in one hand, thumb hovering near the screen. "Don't do this, Patricia," Sharon pleaded. "We've lived here 12 years. You know us. You know Calvin isn't causing any trouble." But Patricia's expression had hardened into something immovable. Rules weren't just rules to her. They were her identity. Enforcing them gave her purpose, and now she'd found her stage. Calvin stepped closer to the fence line, keeping his tone calm but direct. "You make that call, you're gonna waste everybody's time. The cops are gonna show up, take one look at this and realize you dragged them here over nothing." Patricia tilted her head slightly, the smallest smirk touching her lips. "We'll see." And with that, she raised the phone to her ear. MJ muttered, "Dad, she's really calling." Calvin clenched his jaw but didn't stop her. He bent down, picked up his wrench, and turned back to the pool wall, deliberately unscrewing the next bolt. Sharon stood there, arms crossed tight, staring at Patricia like she couldn't believe this was happening. On the other side of the fence, Patricia's voice carried clear as day. "Yes, I'd like to report a disturbance. A resident is engaging in unauthorized construction activity, and he's becoming confrontational." The yard felt different after Patricia hung up the phone. The sun was the same. The grass still carried that dry Texas crunch underfoot, and yet everything shifted. Calvin kept pulling at the metal frame, but every clank echoed louder than it should have, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. MJ stopped helping altogether, hovering by the patio steps, chewing his lip. Sharon leaned against the doorframe, arms folded tight across her chest. She wasn't angry at Calvin. She was anxious. Patricia, though, looked energized. She stood straight-backed, her phone tucked away, her pen scribbling again on the clipboard. For her, this was validation. She wasn't just a neighbor anymore. She was the enforcer, the one keeping order. Calvin finally set his wrench down and looked directly at her. "You really called the cops?" Over this, Patricia didn't flinch. "You left me no choice. If you'd simply filed the proper paperwork." "Paperwork?" Calvin cut in. "To take down my own pool? That's what this is about?" Patricia's voice carried that smug calm people use when they think they've already won. "You think rules don't apply to you, but this neighborhood has standards. Without them, property values drop. If we allow one violation, others will follow." Sharon stepped forward. "You talk about property values, Patricia, but this pool looks like junk. You really think buyers want to see rust and half-collapsed walls?" Calvin's cleaning up the place. Patricia's pen stopped moving, but her eyes were sharp. "It's not about aesthetics. It's about authority. If we let people dismantle structures without approval, what's next? Someone deciding to paint their house neon green?" Calvin's patience cracked. He pointed toward his yard. "That pool belongs to me. That grass? Mine. That fence? Mine. And last time I checked, paying the mortgage gives me the right to fix, build, or remove what I want. HOA or no HOA." Patricia's lips curled faintly. "We'll let the authorities decide." The tension between them hung thick. MJ looked at his dad nervously. "So, what happens when the cops get here?" Calvin crouched down slightly so his son could hear him. "They're gonna see a man taking down a pool on his own land. That's all. Nothing more. Don't worry." But MJ wasn't reassured. "What if they believe her?" Calvin didn't answer. He glanced at Sharon, and her eyes said the same thing. What if? Patricia finally turned to leave, satisfied her part was done. As she walked back toward her house, her voice trailed over her shoulder. "I'll be watching until they arrive." When she was gone, Sharon exhaled hard. "She really did it." "I thought she was bluffing." "People like her don't bluff," Calvin muttered. "They thrive on control." He grabbed the next section of the pool wall, muscles tight from frustration as much as labor. Each bolt he wrenched loose sounded like defiance. "Maybe you should stop, Cal," Sharon said softly. "Just for now. Don't give them more reason to twist this." He looked at her, sweat trickling down his face. "If I stop now, I'm saying she's right, and she's not." Minutes crawled by. The pool slowly transformed from a circular structure into a heap of bent panels and screws scattered across the yard. MJ helped again, though reluctantly, glancing down the street every few seconds. Sharon stood close to the fence, pretending to water a flower bed, but really just waiting. Then they heard it. The low rumble of engines, the crunch of tires rolling slow on asphalt. 2 squad cars turned onto their street, lights flashing but sirens off. "Here we go," Calvin murmured. Sharon's stomach knotted. MJ froze with the panel half lifted in his arms. The neighbors noticed too. Curtains shifted, blinds tilted, doors cracked open. People love a show, and this one had front row seats. But the officers weren't interested in just one side of the story. They wanted to hear it all. The taller officer, whose badge read Officer Landry, glanced between Patricia and Calvin like he was trying to piece together a puzzle with too many missing edges. The second officer, Officer Ramirez, walked a slow circle near the curb, scanning the yard, the scattered panels of the dismantled pool, the tools lying in the grass. Neither officer looked particularly alarmed, but their presence alone shifted the balance of power. Patricia was quick to seize the moment. She waved her clipboard like it was evidence. "Officers, as I stated, Mr. Brewster is engaging in unauthorized construction activity. He has ignored direct instruction to cease work and is violating community regulations. He's also grown confrontational." "I had no choice but to call." Calvin took a step forward, wiping sweat from his brow. With respect, sir, I'm not breaking any laws. That pool was mine, on my property. It's rusted, it's falling apart, and I decided to take it down today with my son. That's all that's happening here. Officer Landry's tone was even, measured. All right, Mr. Brewster, let's slow it down. Can you tell me exactly what you were doing when Miss Norwood called? Calvin gestured to the pile of panels. Taking it apart. I've got bolts, screws, a rusted frame. Nothing more. No loud machines, no noise complaints from anyone else. Just this Ramirez finally spoke, his voice carrying a softer edge. So, this is all about HOA rules? He looked at Patricia. Ma'am, can you clarify what law you believe has been broken here? Patricia blinked, thrown slightly off balance. It may not be a state law, officer, but HOA regulations carry weight. We have bylaws in place for a reason. Allowing him to dismantle this pool without approval undermines the entire structure of our neighborhood. Landry nodded slowly, then looked back at Calvin. Mr. Brewster, did you sign an HOA agreement when you moved into this community? Calvin let out a frustrated laugh. Of course I did. Everybody does. But that agreement doesn't give them the right to control every nail and screw on my property. HOA is supposed to maintain common areas, keep the place respectable, not tell me I can't take down my own pool. Sharon stepped closer now, her voice calm but firm. Officer, please, you can see what's happening. My husband's not threatening anyone, not causing trouble. He's just cleaning up his yard. This is harassment. Patricia snapped her head toward Sharon. Harassment? Following the rules is not harassment. What's harassment is neighbors ignoring the agreements we all signed, making this community look disorderly. Orderly? Calvin said, his voice rising. Patricia, there's a hole in that liner big enough for a dog to crawl through. The pump broke 2 summers ago. You want order? Taking it down is the only thing keeping this place from looking like a dump. Landry raised a hand. All right, everyone. Let's keep the volume down. We're not here to argue HOA politics. We just need to know if any actual crimes have been committed. Ramirez added. So far, I'm seeing a homeowner taking down his pool. That's not a criminal offense. Patricia's jaw tightened, and she adjusted her clipboard like she might squeeze it into splinters. Officers, if you allow this kind of blatant disregard to go unchecked, you're setting a dangerous precedent. The HOA board has authority. Landry cut her off, his tone still polite but sharper now. HOA authority is civil, not criminal. Unless there's a breach of peace or safety issue, this isn't a police matter. That landed heavy. Neighbors who had gathered at their porches and driveways exchanged glances. Some looked relieved, others entertained. Patricia looked cornered, her authority slipping through her fingers, but she wasn't ready to surrender. He's being hostile, she said quickly. You can hear the tone of his voice. He's aggressive. That in itself is a disturbance. Calvin exhaled hard. Aggressive? I've said maybe 20 words to you. The loudest sound out here is me pulling bolts, Sharon whispered to him. Stay calm, Cal. Don't give her more fuel. Landry turned back to Calvin. Mr. Brewster, I need you to keep your cool. We're not here to escalate things. From what I can see, you're fine to continue, but let's make sure this doesn't become a shouting match. Ramirez nodded in agreement. We'll file a call. The sound of metal scraping against rust filled the silence. Neighbors whispered. Patricia clutched her clipboard tighter, her authority unraveling in real time. But just as it seemed the officers had diffused the moment, the crowd of neighbors watching from porches began to stir. And suddenly, this wasn't just Calvin versus Patricia anymore. The yard felt like a stage now. The police stood at the center, Patricia clinging to her clipboard like it was a shield, and Calvin with a wrench still in his hand, sweat glistening across his forehead. But the audience had grown. Doors were cracked open, blinds tilted, neighbors shifting into the open with arms folded. Some leaned against mailboxes, others whispered to their spouses. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore, it was entertainment. Patricia seized the crowd's attention immediately. She raised her voice louder than before, her tone heavy with performance. This is what happens when people refuse to respect the rules we all agreed on. 1 violation today, 20 more tomorrow. If we don't protect our standards, our property values will plummet. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some nodded faintly, others frowned. Calvin turned toward the bystanders, his voice strong but steady. "Let me ask you all something. Do any of you see a problem with me taking down my own pool? Does it hurt you? Does it lower your home's value to see me clean up rusted metal from my backyard?" The silence stretched. Then, from across the street, a man in his 60s, Arthur Gleason, called out, "Pool's been falling apart for years. Looks better coming down than sitting there." Patricia shot him a glare. "Arthur, this isn't about opinions. This is about order." But Arthur wasn't done. "Order is fine, Patricia, but common sense ought to count for something too. You can't police every nail people hammer." Calvin pointed toward Arthur. "Exactly. I'm not putting up a junkyard. I'm cleaning up my yard." Officer Landry raised his hand. "All right, let's keep this civil. No shouting across the street." But the crowd was warming up now, the tension shifting into open debate. A younger couple near the corner whispered, then spoke up. "We don't care about the pool," the woman said. "But Patricia has a point. If nobody follows the bylaws, where does it stop?" Patricia latched onto that like a lifeline. "Thank you. Exactly. This isn't personal. It's about preserving the standards of our community. Without rules, everything deteriorates." Calvin looked back at her, his voice firm. "Patricia, rules are supposed to protect people, not trap them. What you're doing right now isn't about standards. It's about control." The air went taut again. Even the officers seemed caught in the middle, their eyes flicking between neighbors as if waiting for the volume to spike. Sharon finally stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. "Look around you. Everyone's out here because of this circus. What does that say? Not that my husband's causing trouble, but that someone's making a scene out of nothing. If Calvin were out here blasting music at midnight, sure, call the police, but tearing down his own pool on a Saturday morning? That's not a disturbance. That's life." A woman in yoga pants, standing near the corner house, nodded slowly. "She's right. This isn't worth police time." Patricia's jaw clenched. "You all don't understand? If he gets away with this, it undermines the entire framework of our HOA. Rules aren't optional. Neither is freedom." Calvin shot back. His voice didn't shout, but it carried weight. "I bought this house. I pay the mortgage. I pay the dues. That doesn't mean I hand over the keys to my life." For a moment, the yard fell silent. The officers stood quietly, letting the words hang. Neighbors shifted, some uncomfortable, others thoughtful. Finally, Officer Ramirez cleared his throat. "Look, folks, I need to be clear. What's happening here is not a criminal issue. Ms. Norwood, if you feel Mr. Brewster has broken HOA bylaws, that's something you need to pursue through civil channels, but we're not here to enforce HOA codes." Patricia's face burned red, and her grip on the clipboard tightened. "So you're just going to do nothing?" Landry's tone was steady. "Ma'am, we've assessed the situation. There's no breach of peace, no threat to safety. We're documenting the call, and that's the end of our involvement." Patricia looked around at the neighbors, searching for support. But instead of siding with her, most avoided her gaze. Arthur leaned. The neighborhood had fully transformed into an audience now. What began as curiosity, someone cracking open their blinds, another person leaning on a porch rail, was now a small crowd sprinkled across driveways and sidewalks. Kids on bikes coasted slowly past, pretending to ride in circles while really just eavesdropping. Even a couple of dogs barked from fenced yards, sensing the unusual tension. Calvin felt every pair of eyes on him. He didn't want a show. He wanted his Saturday back. But Patricia thrived under the attention, standing taller with her clipboard hugged close, as if the spotlight made her stronger. "Neighbors!" Patricia called out, sweeping her hand like a politician addressing a rally. "This is not about one man's pool. This is about the principle of respecting our community's rules. If we allow him to bypass the board, what message does that send?" Her words carried across the street, crisp and rehearsed. A few murmurs rose from the crowd, some agreeing quietly, others scoffing. Calvin leaned against the pool frame, shaking his head. "She's trying to make this sound like I'm tearing down City Hall. Folks, look at this thing." He kicked at a rusted section of metal siding. The sheet rattled, flakes of paint falling to the grass. "It's junk. It's dangerous. My son cut his hand last summer trying to fix the liner. Tell me one good reason this should stay standing." From the sidewalk, Arthur Gleason spoke again, voice loud and gravelly. "He's right. That pool's been an eyesore for years. Taking it down makes sense. HOA shouldn't be wasting time on this." Patricia glared at him. "Arthur, you've been delinquent on your dues 3 times in the last year. Perhaps you're not the best example of community spirit." Arthur raised his eyebrows. "And there it is, digging up dirt on people who don't agree with you." Classic Patricia laughter rippled from a couple of neighbors. Patricia's face darkened. Another voice piped up, this time from Maya Lynn Ortiz, a young mother holding her toddler on her hip. "I don't mind rules, but honestly, Patricia, you're making this worse. If the board really has a problem, send a letter. Don't drag police out here for nothing." Patricia snapped back. "It's not nothing when bylaws are violated. Do you want property values to tank because people think they can do whatever they please?" Maya Lynn shifted her child on her hip, unimpressed. "Property values aren't dropping because someone takes down a pool. They drop when a neighborhood looks hostile and controlling. People notice when a place feels suffocating. That hit harder than Patricia expected." A few heads nodded. Calvin stayed quiet, letting the words hang in the air. Officer Landry spoke then, his voice steady. "Folks, let's not turn this into a shouting match. We're not here to referee HOA debates, but I'll say this. It's unusual to see this many neighbors come out over something like this. Maybe that tells us the issue isn't the pool, it's how this was handled." Sharon stepped forward, looking directly at Patricia. "See? Even the officers can see it. This wasn't about safety or crime or even real disruption. This was about you proving you're in charge." Patricia's jaw tightened. "I'm in charge because the board put me in charge. Someone has to make sure the rules are followed." Calvin finally spoke up again, voice calm but clear. "Patricia, there's a difference between leadership and control. Leaders earn respect. They listen. They compromise. Controllers, they force their will on people. That's the difference, and everybody here can see which side you're on." The crowd murmured again, louder this time. A couple of teenagers snickered, whispering to each other. Even Ramirez cracked a faint smile, quickly hiding it. Patricia's face turned scarlet. "You think you're clever, Mr. Brewster, but you'll regret this when the board finds you." Arthur chuckled from his driveway. "Good luck getting that fine enforced. We all know half those rules crumble when you test them in court." The sun had climbed higher now, and the Texas heat pressed down heavy on everyone standing in the yard. Sweat trickled along Calvin's temples as he leaned against what was left of the pool frame. He could feel his patience wearing thin, but more than that, he felt the weight of his neighbor's eyes. It wasn't just about him anymore. It had become a public test of authority, of pride, of freedom. Officer Landry adjusted his sunglasses and took a step closer to Calvin. His voice dropped just enough so Patricia couldn't hear every word. "Look, between you and me, you're not in the wrong here. HOA rules? That's civil. It's not criminal. But if this turns into a yelling match or a physical altercation, then it does become our business. You follow?" Calvin nodded slowly. "I follow." Landry gave a quick glance over his shoulder at Patricia, who was still scribbling furiously on her clipboard like she was writing a book. "She's determined. Probably not going to let this go. But legally, you're fine." That small reassurance steadied Calvin. He straightened, wiped his hands on his shorts, and looked over at his son MJ, who stood nervously by the porch. "See, son? Told you. Sometimes you gotta stand your ground. Not everything someone yells at you is true." Patricia noticed the officers, whispering, and stormed over, her heels crunching against the dry grass. "Officers, I certainly hope you're not giving him the impression that he's allowed to ignore our bylaws. That sets a dangerous precedent." Ramirez crossed his arms, his patience clearly thinning. "Ma'am, what we've explained is that HOA bylaws don't fall under our jurisdiction. You have your board for that. Our concern is safety and law, and from what we see, there's no crime being committed here." Patricia's eyes widened, her face blotchy with anger. "So you're telling me he can dismantle this eyesore without consequences? That's absurd. This is exactly why communities fall apart, because no one enforces standards. Calvin finally snapped back, his voice sharper now. Communities fall apart when neighbors treat each other like criminals for minding their own business. The words landed like a stone in still water. Neighbors who had been quiet muttered agreements. Arthur let out a low whistle. Maya Lynn shifted her toddler to her other hip and nodded slowly. Even MJ straightened, pride flickering across his young face. Patricia pointed her pen toward Calvin, almost trembling with rage. "You're twisting this! You're playing the victim, but you're the one who signed the rules and now refuses to follow them. That makes you a liar to your community." Sharon stepped forward before Calvin could reply, her voice calm but cutting. "No, Patricia. A liar is someone who calls the police claiming a man is dangerous when he's not. You exaggerated to get attention. And now the whole neighborhood can see it." The crowd murmured louder this time, and it wasn't in Patricia's favor. Several neighbors shook their heads. One man muttered, "Calling the cops over a pool? Unbelievable." Patricia's composure cracked. Her pen slipped from her hand, landing in the grass. She bent quickly to snatch it up, but the stumble gave away more than she wanted. It showed her losing control. She stood again, clipboard pressed tighter, voice raised higher. "If you all want to live in chaos, fine, but don't blame me when this neighborhood falls apart. Don't come crying when property values drop and buyers turn away because no one respects the rules." Arthur called back, "Better that than living in a dictatorship." That drew laughter, not just from a couple of neighbors, but from the edges of the crowd. Patricia's face went crimson. She spun toward the officers, desperate. "You're just going to let this mob decide what's right?" Landry's voice was calm, but his words were final. "Ma'am, our job here is done. There's no crime. If you want to file a civil complaint with the HOA, you're free to do so. But we're not intervening any further." Patricia stared at him, open-mouthed, as if betrayed. Her authority had evaporated right there in front of the entire street. Calvin picked up his wrench again, deliberately, and twisted another bolt loose. Patricia stood alone, clipboard clutched so tight her fingers whitened. She looked smaller now, diminished, though her glare still burned. She opened her mouth as if to say more, but no words came. Finally, she turned on her heel and marched toward her house, shoulders stiff, footsteps sharp against the pavement. Calvin watched her go, his breathing heavy but steady. For the first time that day, he felt like the ground had shifted in his favor. But just because Patricia walked away didn't mean the battle was over. What came next would test Calvin's patience, his marriage, and even his reputation in the neighborhood. The officers left soon after, their cruisers rolling down the street with lights off, leaving only the muted chatter of neighbors dispersing back into their homes. The energy of the crowd dissolved, but Calvin's heart was still hammering in his chest. He crouched down, grabbing another bolt, trying to distract himself with the work. His hands trembled. Every clink of metal against concrete sounded too loud, like a reminder that things had spiraled far beyond where they should have. Sharon knelt beside him, placing her hand over his. "Cal," she said softly, "you need to breathe. You've been holding it all in." He looked at her, eyes raw with frustration. "She called the cops on me, Sharon." "On me? In front of our son, in front of half the neighborhood, like I'm some criminal tearing up the street." Sharon squeezed his hand tighter. "You're not a criminal." Everyone saw that. Even the officers knew it. "But it doesn't change the fact she'll try again," Calvin muttered. He tossed the bolt into the growing pile and sat back on his heels. "She won't stop." People like Patricia, they live for this. And the board? They'll take her side because she's loud and pushy. MJ hovered a few feet away, awkwardly shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His teenage confidence had crumbled earlier when the squad cars pulled up. Now, he finally spoke. "Dad, I was scared. I thought they were going to take you away." Calvin's heart clenched. He stood and walked over to his son, putting both hands on his shoulders. "Listen to me, MJ. You never let anyone make you think doing the right thing makes you a criminal. Ever. Understand?" MJ's eyes flickered with relief, though his voice was quiet. "Yeah, Dad. I get it." Sharon stood, brushing off her jeans. "He's right. Patricia may have embarrassed us today, but she embarrassed herself too. Everyone saw it. People aren't blind. Calvin let out a bitter laugh. Maybe. But what about the fines? What about the board dragging us through hearings, threatening liens on the house? That's real. That's stress we don't need. Sharon crossed her arms, her voice steady. And what's the alternative? Letting her bully us into silence? You take down a pool today. Tomorrow she's telling us what kind of flowers we can plant, or how many chairs we can put on our porch. It never stops. For a moment, the weight of her words settled on him. He rubbed his face, sweat mixing with dirt. He felt the sting of anger, yes, but also something heavier. Exhaustion. He wasn't just fighting Patricia. He was fighting the system that gave her power. Then it happened. The crack in his armor. He grabbed a panel and tried to haul it across the yard, but his strength gave out halfway. The metal slipped from his grip and clattered against the ground. Calvin slammed his fist against the siding, the sound sharp and final. I'm so damn tired of being treated like I don't own my own life, he said, his voice breaking. I work 50 hours a week. I pay the bills, I pay the dues, and I still have to beg for permission to use my own yard. Sharon stepped forward quickly, wrapping her arms around him. At first he resisted, stiff and tense. But then the fight drained from him. His head rested against her shoulder, his breathing ragged. MJ watched, unsure whether to say anything, but the sight of his father crumbling shook him. For the first time, he saw not just a man who was strong and unshakable, but someone carrying too much weight. Dad, MJ whispered. Don't let her win, please. Don't let her win. Those words struck Calvin deeper than anything Patricia had said. He pulled back from Sharon, wiped his face with his sleeve, and looked at his son. I won't. Not for me. For you. The three of them. By late afternoon, the Brewsters' backyard looked completely different. What had once been a half-standing pool, sagging under years of wear, now lay flattened in a heap of twisted panels and rusted bolts. Sweat streaked Calvin's shirt, dirt smudged his arms, but the job was done. He stood there, chest heaving, staring at the pile like it was more than just metal. It was proof he hadn't caved. Sharon brought out 3 glasses of water, setting them on the patio table. It's gone, she said quietly, almost in disbelief. After all that noise, all the chaos, it's finally gone. MJ dropped onto the grass, wiping his forehead. Never thought taking down a pool would feel like winning a war. Calvin gave a faint laugh, though there was no humor in it. War's not over yet. Patricia'll come back swinging, probably already typing up her email to the board. And he was right. Across the street, Patricia's blinds twitched. Her silhouette hovered like a shadow that refused to leave. She wasn't out on the sidewalk anymore, but her presence was still there, looming. Then something unexpected happened. Arthur Gleason wandered over from across the street, hands tucked in his pockets. Need a hand hauling that junk to the curb? He asked casually. Calvin blinked, caught off guard. You'd help me. Arthur smirked. Why not? Better than sitting around watching reruns. Besides, Patricia's been riding me for years. Feels good to see someone else push back. Not long after, Maya Lynn appeared too, her toddler now down for a nap. She carried a jug of lemonade, setting it on the patio table without asking. Figured you could use more than water. And for the record, you're right. A neighborhood's about people, not power trips. Calvin nodded, gratitude flickering in his tired eyes. Thank you. Both of you. One by one, other neighbors trickled over, some offering words of support, others just standing close as a quiet show of solidarity. The tension that had gripped the street earlier shifted into something else. Quiet unity. Patricia's blinds twitched again, but this time no one looked her way. Sharon leaned toward Calvin, whispering, See? She doesn't have the hold she thinks she does. He looked around at the small group gathered in his yard, and for the first time all day, he believed her. Then, as if on cue, Patricia emerged from her front door. Clipboard still in hand, chin high, but her steps less certain now. She stopped at the curb, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. Enjoy your little moment, Mr. Brewster, but don't think this is over. The board will be issuing a violation notice and you will be fined. Calvin didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his voice steady and measured. You do what you need to do, Patricia. I'll respond, but I won't be bullied into living in fear on my own property. A murmur of approval spread through the neighbors standing nearby. Arthur clapped once, deliberately, slow and mocking. Maya Lynn shook her head, unimpressed. Patricia's face flushed, and she turned back toward her house, retreating faster than she had arrived. The moment she disappeared inside, Sharon wrapped an arm around Calvin's waist. "That's it. She's lost the neighborhood," Calvin exhaled, finally letting the tension drain from his shoulders. He turned to MJ. "You see that? That's how you stand up. Not by yelling, not by swinging fists, but by holding your ground." MJ nodded, his young face carrying a mix of relief and admiration. "I get it now, Dad. You didn't just fight for the pool, you fought for us." The family stood together, framed by the wreckage of the pool and the quiet support of their neighbors. The battle with Patricia wasn't over, but something had shifted. The power she held through fear and rules had cracked, and in its place, a different kind of strength was forming. Community, respect, resilience. Calvin looked at the heap of metal one last time. Funny thing, that night, the Brewster house was quiet, but sleep didn't come easy. Calvin sat at the kitchen table long after MJ went to bed, staring at the dismantled pool stacked in the corner of the yard through the back window. Sharon slid a mug of coffee in front of him, even though it was close to midnight. "You're still wound up," she said softly, sitting across from him. Calvin rubbed the back of his neck. "I can't stop replaying it." The look on MJ's face when the cops pulled up. He was scared, Sharon. Scared of seeing his dad treated like a criminal for doing something as simple as cleaning his yard. "That's what bothers me most." Sharon reached across the table, resting her hand on his. "But he also saw you stand up without losing control. He saw you hold your ground, even when Patricia tried to humiliate you. That's what he'll remember." Calvin nodded slowly. "I hope so. I don't want him growing up thinking you have to bow down just because someone yells louder than..." For a moment they sat in silence, listening to the hum of the fridge and the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere down the street. Then Sharon leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "Cal, today wasn't about the pool. It was about more than that. It was about us proving that respect matters more than rules on paper. Patricia thinks authority is everything, but real authority comes from how you treat people." Her words sank deep. Calvin thought back to the crowd of neighbors, the way Arthur had spoken up, the way Maya Lynn had stood firm, the way people shifted from passive observers to quiet supporters. Patricia had tried to use fear, but what actually held power was truth and solidarity. The next morning, Calvin woke up early. He grabbed a rake and started tidying the yard, gathering leaves and small debris left over from the dismantling. It was quiet now, just the sound of birds overhead. He felt lighter somehow, like the burden had shifted. Arthur strolled over, a thermos of coffee in hand. "Morning," he called, his tone casual. "Morning," Calvin replied. Arthur leaned against the fence. "Heard Patricia already fired off a dozen emails to the board last night. She's relentless," Calvin smirked. "I figured as much. But here's the thing," Arthur continued, lowering his voice. "People saw her for what she is yesterday. You might have more support than you think." It was a small comment, but it hit home. Calvin realized Patricia's power wasn't just in the rules, it was in people's willingness to let her enforce them unchecked. Yesterday, that had started to crumble. Later that afternoon, Calvin sat with MJ on the porch steps. The boy fidgeted with a baseball, tossing it up and catching it. Finally, he spoke. "Dad, you think Patricia's going to keep coming after us?" Calvin looked at him, choosing his words carefully. "Yeah, son, probably. People like her don't just stop. But you know what matters? We don't let her decide how we live. We follow the law, we respect others, but we don't let fear run our house." MJ nodded slowly. "So, standing up doesn't mean you win right away." Calvin smiled faintly. "No, standing up means you choose not to lose yourself. That's the win." The boy leaned back against the porch railing, the lesson settling in. Calvin watched him, proud and humbled all at once. By evening, the heap of pool parts was hauled to the curb, ready for pickup. The backyard looked bare, but also full of potential. Sharon wandered out with a note